Welcome to Psychology Explained, a new channel hoping to explain theories, concepts and studies in psychology. First up, we're going to look at social impact theory, which was by Bibletain in 1981. Social impact theory suggests that there are three different social forces that impact on your behaviour. They can impact on your behaviour the same way that a physical force could impact on you physically. The theory looks at the source, who in the case of obedience that we'll look at would be the person who is giving an order, and the target, who is the person who will be receiving the order. So there are three different fundamental forces that affect your behaviour, and those are strength, immediacy, and number. We use social impact theory to explain a number of different behaviours in social science, things like obedience, peer pressure, bystander apathy, and conformity. The first factor is that of strength. This is how important the person giving the order is to you, or how much power or authority they have over you. So the source in this situation isn't very important to the target and has a minimal impact. However, if they were your boss, they would have more of an impact. Or if they were a police officer, or if they were the king, or if you loved them, or if you thought they were so smart that you should listen. If they were all of these things, and you happen to be in love with your boss, who happens to be a wise and knowledgeable ruler of your country and who happens to be the chief of police, then it would have a huge impact on your behaviour, though probably going to be in a very small minority there. This second factor is immediacy, which is the effect caused by the source being either physically or temporally, which means time, closer to you. This source only has a small impact because it's so very far away from the target. If it was to move closer, however, then the impact would increase and the target would become more obedient. If we look at a real example of this, and suggest that you were mucking about in class and not doing any work, your teacher gets annoyed with you and tells you to stop. The closer they are to you, the more impact they will have when telling you off. So you've successfully annoyed your teacher and they've told you off, and now you're on your best behaviour. What happens is time passes and the teacher suddenly forgets the behaviours that you've done, or it's been a long time since you've done the behaviour. The lesson has moved on. And now, since your telling off is further away, it has less impact on you and you feel free to muck about again. A study investigated this effect just a few months ago. They gave 45 participants the job of asking people to complete a survey. Half asked people via email and half had to do it in person. We asked people to predict how many of those they asked would complete the survey. In the email condition, people predicted approximately 5.5 out of 10 on average, or 55%, would complete the survey when asked, when actually it was closer to 2%. Whereas when they were that asked people to do it in person, predicted similarly 50% of people would complete the survey, when actually it was closer to 70%. The immediacy of the situation caused from the participant being close in person made more people reply than when it was sent via email. A life lesson: when you want someone to do something, ask for it in person rather than by text, instant messenger or email. Number is the last social factor. This is how many sources there are. The more sources, the bigger the impact. One source has some impact, two sources have more of an impact, and three sources have even more of an impact. However, it isn't that simple because of what we call the psychosocial law. For the sake of simplicity on this slide, the power of each source is just going to be represented by the size of their square rather than by using arrows. The impact increases as the number of sources increases, but each new person has a little less impact than the one before them. Going from one person to 3 people is about a 200% increase by adding 2 more people. But going from 16 to 18, whilst we're still adding 2 more people, doesn't see the impact jump up so dramatically. If you could resist 16 people, then you can probably resist 18 as well. Those last 2 people have less impact than the ones who went before them. The psychosocial law says that as the number increases, so does the impact, but at a decreasing rate. The most famous experiment which looked at the effects of the number was that of Milgram, Bickman and Berkowitz back in 1969. They had a Confederate standing in the street just staring at one of the windows of a building. They wanted to see how many of those passing by would either look up or stop altogether. They increased the number of those in the group who were looking up at the building to see the effect that it had. As you can see, as the number of people increased, so did the number of those looking and stopping. Notice again the psychosocial law. 3 people saw the numbers stopping jump to about 60%, whereas adding a further 12 people only added about another 30% to those who stopped. The earlier people had more of an impact. In the real world, these 3 factors of strength, immediacy, and number can all come into play at the same time, causing an even bigger impact on the target. Let's say the ruler of your kingdom, someone you love, and your boss all turn up at your house at the same time and ask you to do them a favour, which is not unlike the start of some unusual dream. They will have a massive impact on you, and chances are you will have a very interesting story for the next day. This is called the multiplication effect. The multiplication effect, if we increase the strength, immediacy, and number, it increases the impact. This is often written as the impact will be a function of strength times immediacy times number. Let's look at a real world example. Let's say someone you know has rang you up to ask for a favour. They have low strength because they're just somebody you know. They have a low immediacy because they're over the phone, and they've got low number because they're by themselves. So they have very little impact. However, let's say that your best friend, their strength increases, which so does their impact. If they've got a crowd of people on the phone with them all egging you on to do something, it has an even bigger impact. Finally, what if instead of ringing you, that stranger turned up at your door? They have more of an impact than they would if they were far away, but not as much as if it was your best friend at your door, and if they brought a host of your other friends. Now the crowd has strength, immediacy, and number, and you'll crumble to their demands, and no one would blame you for doing so. This idea of social forces can work in reverse too. Here we have a source impacting on a target. However, if there are suddenly a lot more targets, the strength that the source has now gets shared out or divided amongst all of the targets. And we call this the divisional effect. In a real life example, let's have a look. Here's a source and a number of targets. The source has been attacked and is injured in the street. The importance or strength of the situation is the person being in danger. But the importance of that gets divided amongst the amount of people standing around. This means that no one is going to help, and we call this bystander apathy. So what can you do in this situation? If ever this sort of thing happens, the theory would suggest that you single out one member of the crowd and say, hey, you in the glasses, help me. This focuses all of the strength onto one person, and they will have more of an urge to help you. There are a few famous studies we can look at around this area. Most famous is Piliaven, Rodin, and Piliaven. This took place on a New York subway in a set of overcrowded cabins. The experiment was set up so that a few minutes into the journey, a Confederate would collapse. In some conditions, he was drunk, and in others, he was ill or hurt. This was shown by him having a cane and things like that. This effectively changed the strength. This effectively changed the strength a little as the person seemed less or more deserving of help. Immediacy was altered naturally by where the bystanders stood. The drunk victim was helped in 19 out of 38 trials, about 50%. The cane victim was helped in 62 out of 65 trials, about 95%. They were, however, very clear in this study to point out that diffusion of responsibility was not evident. In fact, the field experiment found that the quickest help came from the largest groups of people. So this could be seen to go against social impact theory. The most famous real-world case of this is that of Kitty Genovese, whose story went on to inspire stories in comics, music, TV, movies, and books. Kitty was from New York City, and one night she came home from work and she was attacked several times by the same man on the walk from the car park to a block of flats. The story goes that 37 people saw the attack and didn't do anything to help. There has, however, been questions raised about all of this in the intervening years, which explains away what occurred as people thinking it was a lover's quarrel, or there was a problem with how the police reports were recorded and things like that. So its validity can be questioned and how much it supports this theory. Another study that supports this is Sudeikis and Jackson. They tested this theory in the zoo. This is a particularly crappy zoo with just a duck, but this study did take place in a birdhouse at the zoo, so maybe there might have been some ducks, possibly rare exotic ducks. What they did in the study was told a member of the public not to lean against the railing which surrounded the cage. The man doing the telling off either had low strength and was dressed in ordinary clothes, or had high strength and was dressed as a zoo guard. They also looked at how obedient people were instantly after being told off versus after some time had passed. And finally, they were alone or in a group. We saw what we would already predict based on what we know about the theory. The more strength and the more immediacy, meant the more impact. We also saw the divisional effect. When the person was by themselves, they were impacted on more. When they were in a group, the telling off had less impact. Mullen is another study which looks at social impact theory. This one criticizes it. They questioned the validity of the actual theory. So they conducted a meta-analysis looking at lots of different research into social impact theory. So there are two main ways that we can study behaviours like this. First, by asking people what they would do in a certain situation, and secondly, by completing experiments and measuring their actual behaviour. In the studies where people were asked what they would do in situations, both strength and immediacy were seen as important. But when they experimented on it, neither was found to be effective. Mullen claimed that evidence was inconsistent. This study itself, however, has been criticised for not using enough studies to make it the best representation of the evidence. One last big criticism of the theory is that it takes a situational approach to behaviour. It says you can explain the behaviour by looking at just the external situation that people are in. It ignores that some people might be different. There might be something about their personality or something about their past. Perhaps they're just a massive rebel, which means that they won't listen to authority, and somebody in authority would have less strength to them than they would to someone else. Okay, so that's it. We've covered how obedience, conformity, bystander apathy, and peer pressure can all be altered and manipulated through the use of strength, immediacy, and number. Please don't go using your newfound knowledge for evil.